My name's Gary Orfield. I'm a professor and co-director of the Civil Rights Project here at UCLA. And I've been a leader or a co-leader of the Civil Rights Project since it was founded 20 years ago in 1996 at Harvard. The Civil Rights Project came out of the crisis of affirmative action. In one year, in 1996, the voters in California and the courts in Texas eliminated affirmative action. And suddenly, in just those two states, affirmative action for college was eliminated for half of the Latino students in the United States and two of the largest African American communities and significant Indian communities here in California. What we did an emergency meeting in the basement of Gutman Library at Harvard, where we got 25 college presidents, civil rights leaders, government officials, and leading researchers together to think about what we could do in the light of the fact that pretty soon this case would probably go to the United States Supreme Court. What we found in that day was kind of terrifying to Chris Edley and me. We found that there was no plan B for higher education in the United States. Nobody knew what would happen if affirmative action was eliminated. And the lawyers and the researchers weren't really talking to each other, and the research community really hadn't produced much evidence about how affirmative action actually created benefits for all groups of students, not just for the students of color who were the immediate beneficiaries. What we decided after that meeting was that there needed to be a new generation of interdisciplinary research about racial justice in the United States. And Chris and I created the Civil Rights Project and began to try to do this. Nobody knew how to do it, and when we thought about the idea and got together a lot of leading researchers at Harvard for a lunch to talk about it, they all said, "Don't call it civil rights. That's kind of obsolete." And we didn't think so. So we wanted to put it in everybody's face. This is about civil rights. We're not done, folks, in our society. So our goal and what we accomplished really was to get leading researchers in the country to address the issues that were going to actually come before the court, that were actually being debated in the country, and to communicate to a much broader audience than they normally do by editing their materials and making them accessible to readers who don't read academic journals. We also created an interaction between civil rights groups and lawyers, some of the best lawyers in the country, and researchers, which was very creative because the lawyers asked the researchers a lot harder questions than they got in the academic world lots of times. So we developed a model of defining questions that needed to be answered, challenging leading researchers to answer them, creating a peer review process and a demanding standard, reviewing these things together, challenging each other, and producing materials that would speak to the most controversial issues of the day. So we began to produce books. We've produced over 500 studies at this point. We've produced about 20 major books. But we also had a continuous process of interaction between our work and the work of civil rights organizations. We didn't work for lawyers. We didn't do what they asked us to, but we struggled with the questions that they were struggling with, and we gave them the best answers that we could find in the research world, and we challenged researchers to address questions that weren't on their immediate agenda but were on the country's agenda and try to make them part of that process. It was an extremely exhausting and challenging and fascinating process, and we did find that almost all of the most important researchers in the country, if you called them and said, "We really need to have some answers to some questions that aren't in your journals but are coming before the court, and we think you'd be the best person to do it." And if they didn't agree immediately, said to them, "Why did you study this? Isn't it your responsibility to speak to these issues in the country? Isn't it your responsibility to use your best understanding and communicate it to a broad democratic discussion in the country about these issues and the litigation that's going on about them. When the Supreme Court eventually did take the affirmative action case from the University of Michigan, we were very directly involved in every part of the preparation of that case, and we published a book before the case called Diversity Challenged, and worked with other groups that were creating studies. When the case came to the Supreme Court, it was a much more conservative Supreme Court than had upheld affirmative action back in the 1970s by a single vote. And most people expected that we would have some kind of a loss. And all of the groups in the country that were working on this were prepared, if the worst came to worst, that we were going to talk about what would be the next thing, what would be the alternatives that people should try, et cetera, et cetera. On the day of the decision, the key justice, Justice O'Connor, wrote the opinion. And the opinion turned out to be a really powerful reaffirmation of affirmative action. Though she was a conservative Arizona politician originally, before she went on the court, and very close to Justice Rehnquist, her opinion upheld affirmative action sweepingly, and in very important ways it relied on the research that we and our colleagues had done. And we actually had the honor of our book being cited right in the text of the decision as a basis for continuing affirmative action. So this is kind of a proof of the power of good research appropriately done and connected to the people who are doing the advocacy and the other work to actually change policy, to actually create or sustain basic rights. Exactly the kind of thing that didn't happen after the Reconstruction. We've had, in our other work, in the many scores of studies that we've done, we've had a deep influence on school integration cases around the country. Some of it has been involved in discussions of housing discrimination. Some of it has been involved in numerous other areas of policy, economic effects of education, bilingualism, the treatment of immigrant students. When we came here to California, we opened up a much broader and deeper connection with the issues of the Latino students, who are now more than a quarter of all the students in the United States and have the greatest problems in terms of college success. And we began to think more internationally about the interaction, particularly between the United States and Latin America. But this has been a totally fascinating experience. We've created networks of scholars around the country that address vital issues, that work together, that will do work for nothing because they care about it, and will do very good work. And we've maintained very high scholarly standards. And we've now got numerous people who've been involved in our research in important positions in universities across the country, carrying out this kind of research. And we go long into the future, as it will be needed long into the future, because these are eternal issues in our society.